The chain of events set in motion by the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 have taken Americans from ground zero here in New York to the front lines of war in Afghanistan and now Iraq. Welcome to CNN Presents. I'm Aaron Brown. In the 2 years following September 11th, America has gone to war not once but twice, all in the name of fighting terror. Last week here we focused on that horrible day in September, the towers, the collapse, the death. This week, part two of America Remembers, a look at our nation's response to September 11th.
It is almost 22 hours after the unspeakable terrorist incident that has forever changed New York City. Some of the headlines Americans are waking up to this morning: the Daily News proclaiming it is war, the New York Post saying an act of war.
In the area of where the blast occurred from the commercial jetliners, it's like a nuclear winter. Ash, soot piled on top of cars 3 inches deep.
If yesterday was surreal, today is all about reality. Today we're going to start to get a sense of the dimension of this.
We have been successful in recovering at least one other person, and we're in the process of doing everything we can to try to locate other people.
Across America, the hope still goes on that many more people will be rescued from that rubble in New York City and perhaps even at the Pentagon.
It is shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning in Washington, and at 8 o'clock, part of the Pentagon opened up for work.
The Pentagon was insistent that it wanted to show that it was still in operation.
The search is beginning inside now as they try and find out exactly the human tragedy of this catastrophe that has befallen the Pentagon.
All night long, Miles, the dome light on the very top of the Capitol has been burning here. The Congress never officially went out of session. That light,
the light was on, and I remember just that striking me, that it was so symbolic that they left the light on to show that democracy was still okay.
City officials have no idea what kind of reality they confront in the rubble of the World Trade Center. It was hell down there. It made me sick. It made me sick to my stomach to see it. Then you would turn a corner and you would see these heroic rescue workers. And these people worked 24 hours on, 24 hours off, and they were not going to give up until they were 100% sure that one of their own wasn't left behind.
There were trucks and police cars everywhere you looked. You couldn't move. Streets were closed. There was no place to get food. Nobody was going to work.
The NASDAQ, the Dow Jones closed. All public schools are closed.
I mean, there was no business for anyone to do. And the city was weeping.
The mayor expects the fatality numbers to be horrendous. He calls them, quote, very, very high.
The numbers that we're working on are in the thousands.
We thought this would be like Oklahoma City, where you'd have injuries and amputations to get people out of heaps of debris, but there weren't any. Either you were okay or you were dead, basically.
September 11th certainly opened the eyes of an entire nation. All I remember hearing, apart from the grief, obviously, and the shock, was questions such as, why? Who are these people? Why do they hate us? We want answers. We want to know.
U.S. officials confident that the evidence right now pointing to affiliates or associates of Osama bin Laden.
When it became clear that bin Laden was probably involved and that Afghanistan was at the core of this, we knew Nick Robertson was there.
You can hear me.
And started making plans to go to him.
Certainly, Osama bin Laden is a figurehead, not only in Afghanistan, but in this part of the world. He is somebody that some young followers of Islam might look towards as a particular type of leader that they behold.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
I think he was very forceful.
Thank you all.
He was clearly in charge. He was shocked
like all of us, and he was angry.
I've just been told that the United States Senate is being evacuated. That,
Tell you is that people are very much on edge here, as they are. There was a suspicious package, and that's why they're evacuating the members of the House.
Come on, come on.
Back, please, back. Don't run, don't panic, don't get hurt, calmly, quickly.
A building here in Midtown Manhattan has been evacuated because of what's being described as an unspecified bomb threat.
Damn terrorists!
All of a sudden, I saw everybody moving off the rooftop. And I said, what's going on?
Move off the block.
And they said, it's a bomb scare.
People in the city, as you can imagine, are enormously tense.
We were living, all of us, in this odd cocktail of fear and rumor and vulnerability.
We're not reporting the bombs that
He called me at 10 to 9 and said, our building has just been hit by a plane.
There was the second plane that came around and slammed into the building.
When he went to work, his mom said goodbye, gave him a big kiss, and never saw him again.
And I said, oh God, John, please get out of there safely.
We're at the corner of Lexington and 26th Street in Manhattan. We're at the Armory, where hundreds of families are lined up behind me trying to get information about their missing loved ones. They're asking for all... When we first arrived there, my producer Miriam Falco and I, we were concerned because we did not want to thrust ourselves at these people. This woman right here. We felt very strongly that if they didn't want to talk to us, we didn't want to talk to them, and we weren't going to hound them.
I'm looking for my older nephew.
But in fact, it was the opposite.
We've been here over 2 hours. They told us twice they'd take us next.
They sought us out. And I have here with me Vinnie Kamaj. Several different people stand out in my mind from September, and one of them is Vinnie Kamaj. He was the first interview that I did on camera. He was looking for his father. His father was a window washer at the World Trade Center. If you think your father might be out there somewhere, what would you want to say to him?
I want to tell him that we all miss him. His little nephew, Luke, misses him. And that we're strong. We got hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron, I've been talking to these families for 2 days now, and all of these stories are very much like this. People are just hoping that their relatives are out there somewhere, and they're begging us. It was just so moving to hear from this young man how he was just searching and searching for his father.
If anybody see my daughter.
He has a daughter, 7 months old.
I want him to come home.
But we're not going to give up until we find you. We love you.
When you interview person after person who is missing someone who is so special to them, so important, fathers, mothers, sisters, wives, husbands, children, I don't know how you can help but cry.
This is part of the prelude to this prayer service that was called yesterday by President Bush when he said today would be a day of national prayer and remembrance.
A striking picture if you just look at the pews. You see the former presidents, you see Al Gore there.
So many have suffered so great a loss, and today we express our nation's sorrow.
The most interesting moment of the day was after the president spoke and he came back and sat down in the pew, and his father reached across and just grabbed his hand, and it was sort of an attaboy, or good for you.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
I think people understood what he was saying, and you could see it in the reaction.
Do you want bin Laden dead?
I want him held. I want justice. And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said "Wanted, dead or alive."
We are one country today, committed, unified in the pursuit to find and punish and obliterate
those who committed that horrible act against this great nation.
The emotion here is rising dramatically. Everybody is moving into position.
Our heroes will now open the marketplace.
The determination not to allow terrorists to shut down our financial system was absolute. The markets today tumbling right from the opening bell. The Dow Jones Industrials plunging more than 650 points. Over the course of the next 5 days, $1 trillion in market capitalization was ripped out of our financial markets. $1 trillion.
What I remember most about it, the days and weeks and months after, is the smell. I don't know what that smell is. Jet fuel mixed with burning steel, mixed with human tragedy. I remember thinking how small the city felt, how sad the city was. Oh God, it was sad.
There were hundreds of funerals that were packed with New Yorkers who had never met these firefighters before, and I think that says a lot about the healing that went on here. We all wanted to feel like we were doing our part to say thank you.
Oh, say, can you see?
This is Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. Down below us, a prayer for America, a memorial service here in New York.
What so proudly we hailed.
In the days since this attack, we have met the worst of humanity with the best of humanity. We pray for all of those whose loved ones are lost and missing. We pray for our children, and we say to them, do not be afraid. It's safe to live your life.
I became a New Yorker in a day. After 10 years of fighting it and not getting it, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with New Yorkers. I was so proud of how they were dealing with this terrible thing.
They were committed from the very beginning to deliver their city from the ashes and build it back up again, come hell or high water.
Ago today that American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston for Los Angeles and crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. There has been a remarkable spirit of unity in this country since the September 11th attacks.
My fellow citizens, for the last 9 days, the entire world has seen for itself the state of our union, and it is strong. Tonight we are a country awakened to danger and called to defend freedom.
We have now learned that the U.S. Army is sending out deployment orders to units. It will involve various commando units, including the Rangers, the Special Forces, units that they call Special Ops.
It was another painstaking day for recovery workers at the World Trade Center disaster site as more victims are confirmed dead.
Our grief has turned to anger, and anger to resolution.
These terrorist cowards are not going to be allowed to break our spirit. In fact, they made a very big mistake.
Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done.
It was a perfect speech. I don't know that any president has ever given a speech where more of the country wanted him to succeed.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
President Bush is warning the Taliban that time is running out for them to surrender suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden.
Welcome all the journalist community.
Afghanistan's Taliban rulers say they won't give up Osama bin Laden without evidence, if at all.
If infidels invade an Islamic country, jihad becomes religious obligation of all Muslims. Osama bin Laden!
We strongly condemn this most brutal and horrible act of terror and violence.
Much unrest now in Pakistan over the government's alliance that it has formed with the Bush administration.
The hard work of building this international coalition continues today. The State Department
We've also had conversations with Portuguese Foreign Minister, the Saudi Foreign Minister, Moroccan, Tunisian.
Secretary Powell, more than 80 telephone calls, we are told, in the past 10 days to world leaders, his counterparts, other heads of states.
The Bush administration realized very quickly that they could not conduct a global war on terror or even a war in Afghanistan without building up a coalition.
I want to thank the Chancellor for his solidarity with the American people.
A coalition of sympathy and support that was a broad coalition that encompassed not just Western democracies, but also Muslim states.
What I am told by senior administration officials is the Pakistani government has promised to, quote, fully cooperate.
The Bush administration needed these countries, and it was remarkable how almost seamlessly and smoothly this incredible coalition was built up.
Our war is against evil, not against Islam. We don't hold any religion accountable. We're fighting evil.
There's an old rule in politics, whether you're trying to sell a tax plan or whatever message you're trying to sell, it's repetition, 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 repetition.
We do not fight against Islam. We fight against evil.
Today we are releasing the photographs of 19 hijackers of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center towers, into the Pentagon, and into the rural area in Pennsylvania.
You finally saw the faces of evil, people who carried out the most mind-boggling attack and assault on America, who had claimed so many innocent lives, looking into the eyes of these hijackers.
According to experts who've studied suicide bombing for a long time, these people aren't crazy. They're very rational. They've thought this out. And that's the scary thing, because it's very difficult to spot a rational actor out there who's willing to take his life to take out thousands of people.
The spirit of America is incredibly strong.
The administration, both from a psychological standpoint and from an economic standpoint, thought that it was imperative to try to make the case that it was safe to fly again.
We are serious about airline safety in America.
You had Bush himself go out to Chicago and do the rally at the airport.
Get on the airlines. Get about the business of America.
You got the impression from listening to him that it was our patriotic duty to get back to work, to get in the air, to take that business trip, even though you really don't want to.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, ended its search and recovery efforts at the World Trade Center ruins today.
When FEMA announced officially that the search for survivors was over, it was a very sad time.
It's an inevitable stage. You have to reach it. But it is a terrible point to reach, because then you are admitting to the families, and they have to admit to themselves that that dream, that fantasy, that their loved one is going to be found unconscious, or maybe in a hospital room and unable to communicate, or maybe trapped in a void, that moment is gone.
maintain a level of readiness. We're in a prepare mode.
We train every day for war and pray for peace.
We're at a heightened state of security. We pride ourselves on being ready to go whenever the nation calls us.
We had a pretty good idea that the war was going to start probably on Sunday.
Senator Edwards, thanks for joining us. Welcome back. I was anchoring our Sunday program, Late Edition, and I was sitting there when they told me in my ear, get ready, this war has begun. We have a live picture that we're showing from Kabul. We're seeing some flashes over there.
There was a big flash, and then there is firing into the air.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Operation Enduring Freedom opened up on October 7th like many other military campaigns. U.S. fighters and bombers taking out key Taliban targets.
One thing that the United States did realize it had to do right away was it had to get its own people on the ground, special forces, to help spot targets and direct the bombing to make it more lethal and more effective.
Now I'd like to show you some gun camera footage showing target destruction. In this case, the picture speaks for itself.
I've reflected on some of the questions that were posed at the last briefing about the speed of progress and questions about the patience of the American people. Today is November 1st. And if you think about it, the smoke at this very moment is still rising out of the World Trade Center. In the end, war is not about statistics, deadlines, short attention spans, or 24-hour news cycles. It's about will to see this through to certain victory.
Officials with CNN now confirming through officials with the Northern Alliance that the town of Mazar-e-Sharif apparently has been taken.
The Northern Alliance claims to have retaken the strategic city in a surprise move, which, if true, represents a dramatic setback for the Taliban.
I think people who really knew the Taliban, who really had experience in Afghanistan, were not surprised that the Taliban essentially turned tail and ran. They did not put up a fight.
This was our plan, not to enter the city, and we had reached to the outskirts of Kabul, as far as 6 kilometers north of Kabul last night. But then Taliban withdrew.
I arrived in Kabul the day after it had fallen.
People who've been here during the day have seen all the people of Kabul out on the streets. The markets were bustling, shops were open again, music was being played again. I can't emphasize how important that is, because music was one of those things that was banned by the Taliban.
And people felt just relieved that the Taliban had gone. The scenes of people joyous, in the streets, women smiling, lifting their burqas shyly, children being able to be children again, men going to barbers and shaving off their beards that had been compulsory and regulation length under the Taliban. Of all the dramas in the Afghan war, the uprising at the prison, the fort at Mazar-e-Sharif, was perhaps the most dramatic. Here you had hundreds of Taliban and allegedly Al-Qaeda prisoners who'd been rounded up.
The incident began as some Taliban prisoners blew themselves up with some hand grenades, creating a scene of panic and chaos. After that, some of the Taliban fighters managed to seize some weapons from other soldiers or from the dead soldiers and start shooting all around them.
There's hundreds dead here, at least. I don't know how many Americans are here.
Mike Spann, seen here in a high school photo, was a CIA operations officer. He had been gathering intelligence from Taliban prisoners at a compound near Mazar-e-Sharif and was killed during their bloody uprising.
And on that day in Mazar-e-Sharif, as we know, Mike Spann and his CIA colleague was questioning one of the recaptured prisoners, John Walker Lindh.
In a CNN exclusive, a shocking discovery in Afghanistan, an American believed to be serving in the Taliban regime.
I was a student in Pakistan studying Islam, and I came into contact with many people who were connected with Taliban. So I started to read some of the literature of the scholars and the history of the movement, and this, my heart became attached to them.
And of course, as we've been saying, the focus is on finding Osama bin Laden.
In terms of Mr. bin Laden himself, we'll get him running. We'll smoke him out of his cave. And we'll get him eventually.
History has shown that it's very difficult to get a single individual. In fact, in the past, the U.S. has tried to never build a policy around capturing a single individual because it's so difficult.
It was then believed by early December he was somewhere up in the Tora Bora region.
This has been a day of unbroken military activity by United States forces in the sky, air activity, B-52 bombers attacking the White Mountains, Tora Bora behind me.
What is the latest thinking now about where bin Laden might be?
Anybody's guess is the latest thinking.
We do not know with precision where he is, and that's the same status, same answer you've heard for quite a period of time on that.
By the end of 2001, all the major cities in Afghanistan had fallen. The Taliban had fled. But had they really? The Taliban are people who live in Afghanistan. They go back to their villages. They go back to their farms, to their families. The ideology is still there in many places in Afghanistan.
There is no doubt that the United States military intervention in Afghanistan has had a net positive effect for the people of Afghanistan. Their situation has not become perfect since, but it is incredibly and immeasurably better.
The Centers for Disease Control has just confirmed the diagnosis of anthrax in a patient in a Florida hospital. Based on what we know at this point, it appears that it's an isolated case.
We first found out about anthrax when we found out about the case of photo editor Robert Stevens, who worked at American Media in Boca Raton, Florida. And here was a man who had contracted anthrax, and no one could figure out where.
Some disease organisms are so tiny that a single drop of liquid culture may contain millions of them.
We hadn't seen a case of inhaled anthrax for 25 years.
Breathing in only a few could cause infection.
Anthrax was certainly one of those things that we absolutely glossed over in medical school. Just one of those, here's what anthrax is, but you'll never really need to know about it.
So the news at this time apparently is not good for that man.
Bob Stevens, 63 years old.
Passed away at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
The big question for investigators, was it natural or was it bioengineered?
I remember getting a phone call early one morning, an anonymous source who called and said, FBI is coming in with a full team to the area to try to track this down. This is serious. Everyone was asked to give blood, be tested for the presence of anthrax. Long lines of people outside those offices as they were trying to find out whether they too were infected. And so that's when things really started to grow.
This is all new to everybody, and it's changing second by second.
Good morning, I'm Andy Lack, I'm with NBC. I'm here with the mayor and with Bob Wright and Tom Brokaw and some of the mayor's key colleagues. And this morning, as many of you know now, we received a positive test for cutaneous anthrax for one of our colleagues who works on nightly news.
Our nation is still in danger, but the government is doing everything in our power to protect our citizenry. The American people need to go about their lives.
And I've worked with Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather and Peter Jennings, and so when it became clear that 3 media outlets had received either letters or something that contaminated the place, it's pretty darn scary.
We all did this thing in our minds. What have we touched? What have we opened?
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
At about 10:15 this morning, a member of my staff opened an envelope.
The U.S. Justice Department has just released copies of the letters with anthrax that were mailed to Tom Brokaw of the New York Post, as well as the Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle.
The FBI wanted to put the letters out before the public to see whether anyone else might possibly recognize the handwriting. The message was virtually the same in a number of them. Death to America, death to Israel, you die now.
What's the problem? My breathing is very, very labored. I don't know if I have been, but I suspect that I might have been exposed to anthrax. Work for the Postal Service.
The anthrax attacks continue. Today, confirmation that 2 postal employees have died as a result of inhaling anthrax.
No one was really thinking, according to officials, that any of the spores could possibly have gone through the envelope and into the air to infect anyone. They were wrong, and they were very tragically wrong, because as they then came to learn, yes, people were infected in that post office too. So while you had hundreds of people lining up on Capitol Hill being treated with antibiotics, that wasn't happening at the Brentwood Mail facility.
A widening crisis. Traces of anthrax are found at more government buildings.
A second NBC employee has contracted cutaneous anthrax.
Traces of anthrax discovered at a CIA mail sorting facility.
A letter carrier has been affected.
Late today, a White House mail screening facility also testing positive for anthrax spores.
I don't have anthrax.
Well, this prompted incredible scares around the country because people didn't know whether they would be next. How many of these letters were out there? Would they get something in their mail that might be impacted with the anthrax too?
In the end, 5 people died, 18 people were confirmed infected, and whoever was trying to do this, if they were trying to kill lots of people, they failed miserably. And we proved to ourselves that this infection was something that we could get a handle on. We could treat people. 30,000 people were on antibiotics at one time or another, but we beat that.
Hey, what? Breaking news this evening. The FBI is warning of more potential attacks against the United States.
While not specific as to target, gives the government reason to believe that there may be additional terrorist attacks within the United States.
Traces of anthrax have been found in at least 4 more post offices.
A major scare at a Greyhound bus station in Philadelphia today.
Federal officials at the nearby 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant received what is being called a threat yesterday.
We're watching things at Hartsfield International Airport after a person apparently breached security. The airport has been basically shut down. There are thousands of people stranded there.
We are told Vice President Dick Cheney being kept apart from the president again, just in case the White House is a target of a terrorist strike.
The enemy is resourceful and ruthless. We have to assume there will be more attacks.
Officials were very scared that there would be another attack. And there was a long laundry list of different sectors that they wanted to protect. Aviation, it goes without saying, a lot of attention paid there. But they were also concerned about nuclear plants, about chemical plants, about the ports, which are hugely vulnerable, about the borders, which are very porous.
We urge Americans in the course of their normal activities to remain alert and to report unusual circumstances or inappropriate behavior.
Everybody is concerned about what's going to happen next.
You just feel so vulnerable now because you don't know what's going to happen, where it's going to happen.
A lot of people are afraid. They're scared.
It's overwhelming, the whole thought of it.
devastation.
In those days after the terrorist attack, we began to see terrorists on every corner and believed that they had an overwhelming ability to strike our nation.
In the name of Homeland Security, Attorney General John Ashcroft is asking law enforcement officials nationwide to interview some 5,000 people currently here on temporary visas.
We have in detention about 563 individuals who are being detained on Immigration and Naturalization Service items related to the events of 9/11.
Look out! Look out! A lot of people were being rounded up and being held virtually incommunicado.
Are there still, in your estimation, sleeper cells, Al-Qaeda sleeper cells roaming around the United States at this time?
We have every reason to believe that there are still people out there who came into this country for the purpose of trying to hurt us.
The whole point of a sleeper cell is to blend in, to become part of the population, leading normal lives, waiting for that point to be activated, and then carrying out their attack.
Osama bin Laden lashes out at the United States and the United Nations in a videotape broadcast today by the Arab-language TV channel Al Jazeera. On the tape, bin Laden claims the United States has no proof to justify its attacks in Afghanistan.
The White House reacts, and Condoleezza Rice calls in the heads of the television networks and asks for restraint. They were concerned that there might be secret messages transmitted to sleeper cells on what to do next, what to hit next, and so on, in these tapes. Time passes, and we haven't heard from bin Laden. And I get word, along with one or two other journalists, that there is another tape of bin Laden that has not been released. That it is a tape that bin Laden might not want released.
U.S. officials say that when you see this tape, you will have no doubt that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda were the masterminds of the terrorist strikes on the United States 3 months ago.
There's something about looking at him, laughing at him. There's something about that, the toadies who were in the room kind of egging him on, making him seem like such a hero because there were 3,000 dead Americans and that they didn't even think that building would collapse completely. It was beyond our expectations, he says. I did the calculations, he says. And you just, you want to retch.
Aviation officials at Logan Airport saying that a man on board American Airlines Flight 63 was apparently trying to ignite explosives that were in his shoes.
We were lucky. He didn't get away with it. Some courageous passengers and crew members wrestled him down and stopped him.
Officials saying that the man in custody was carrying a British passport, identifying him as Richard Reed. They say he's about 28 years old.
We think it is very important since September 11th for America to remain on the highest possible alert.
We will take every possible action to make sure that this kind of injury and assault on America and on its freedom does not happen again.
The thing that is so scary is that it is impossible to protect all the things they need to protect.
We will be on alert indefinitely.
On September 11th, the Pentagon and the trade towers were burning. The Taliban were in power, and Afghanistan was a reasonably safe haven for terrorists.
We celebrate Christmas in a time of testing with American troops far from home.
Today, the fires are finally out. The Taliban have been driven from power. Their leaders are on the run.
And this is a year we will not forget. Those who lost loved ones in the attacks on September the 11th and on the battlefield, they will remain in our prayers.
I want to tell you that my husband is a hero, not because of the way that he died, but rather because of the way that he lived.
I found myself at a loss for words. I still do when I think about this. It was too enormous. The pictures didn't do it justice.
It shakes your very foundation. It shakes the core of who we are as people. We will never live with the degree of innocence any of us ever had.
We've had this sense for the whole of American history that the oceans protected us. And we know that's not true anymore.
The first morning in New York, I came across a poster on a lamppost describing a man with brown hair and brown eyes, 36 years old, 5'11", 175 pounds, missing. And it was the exact description of me. The people in the towers could have been any one of us.
What I take away from this is that even in the most difficult, even in the most sorrowful of times, that the human spirit emerges and can truly make a difference. This wasn't a scene where there was no hope or no love. There was a lot of love.
Nobody's going to forget the 11th. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you lived. You'll know where you were, and you'll know how you thought and what you thought.